TV6 and on ZingoTV on Chromecast and all smart TVs 2016 forward. Please remember to download the Barn Burner and ZingoTV apps in their respective app stores. Both are free on both iOS and Android devices. While you're using, please remember to rate and leave a comment so we know that you're enjoying them and getting the most out of your usage. So on this episode of Six and Sticks, I'm really pleased to be joined by Benjamin Steiner, who I've had on before to talk OHL and U Sports, but this time I'm having him on to talk about the Toronto Six and the NWHL in relation to some of the things currently going on ahead of their inaugural season. Ben, thank you so much.
Very happy to join you and excited to talk some women's hockey, especially with the season approaching, hopefully in January.
Yeah, that's like you said, nailed it right there. The hope is that is in fact happening with the cross-border situation that obviously remains an unknown and something we will continue to keep tabs on. But I thought this would be different for you, and obviously I appreciate your willingness. So with your U Sports knowledge, maybe we'll start off with the fact that this team is set to play their inaugural season, at least for the time being. The plan still remains for them to play at Kenlin Ice Sports, which is also home of the York Lions. So what were your thoughts as that decision kind of came down, knowing that they were also skating at Scotiabank Pond, trying to figure out, what was better for them in terms of where they like to call home?
Well, I really think that landing at Catland in the end is probably the ideal situation. You can get out there pretty easily by really any means of transit, whether it's taking the TTC on the bus or the subway. You can get out there within about 5 minutes walking distance very easily. So when you're trying to approach a fan base that is going to be fairly nomadic, you want to have transit being accessible. And so that's a big thing to me. And I don't think that would have been the case if they had landed at Herbert Carnegie Arena or even the Scotiabank Pond, for example. Well, I think the Scotiabank Pond is a great place for a team like the Toronto Six or a junior team as well. I think landing at Canlan is an ideal situation. And the fact that they can have their own professional setup at Canlan is also a very strong attribute to that new facility.
Yeah, that I really agree with. Again, you mentioned the professional attribute being their own locker room. However, what really stood out to me was the fact that at Scotiabank Pond is they have about, if I remember correctly, it was 18 NHL-sized locker rooms, fully equipped with enough lockers and enough showers for each individual, which was just another thing that stood out to me. So, when you considered that and then you consider just the locker room at Canlan, does it surprise you that happened?
Not really. I think the ones at Scotiabank Pond are more for community hockey. So while they are nice dressing rooms in their own right, they're not really up to snuff for a professional team. And even if you were to renovate them for a professional team, that facility was built for community hockey to have a mass ice complex. And so was Canlan to have a nice ice complex. But they had the ability to build another dressing room connected to their main rink, where, of course, the York Lions men's and women's hockey teams would play and be based out of in a regular year if there was a hockey season. But they have the opportunity to build their own place and really make their home at Canlan, which I don't think they would have been able to do at Scotiabank Pond.
Yeah, again, I think that part I can certainly agree with you. And what's really unique about Kenlin is the fact that they're actually playing on Olympic ice, and they would become the first NWHL team to do so. Now, the Buffalo Beauts do have that option. However, they have not expressed interest in doing that. So how does that maybe, I would use the word impact, but maybe how would that benefit this team with a wider ice length rather than any other team in the league?
Well, I think it can really prove an advantage to some of the players that we'll get into a bit later in the show, because you take a look at the Toronto Six roster, 17 players under contract already. You have a player like Sarah Steele. She was scoring above a point per game with KMH Budapest last year in the Hungarian league. And of course, that is on international ice as well. So she's not going to have to make that adjustment back to North American ice after playing a couple years on international ice. You also have a player like Brooke Broquist or Emma Woods, who also have experience on international ice. And so I really think for the Toronto Six, it might even be an advantage, because those are skilled players, especially Sarah Steele in her own right, playing for the Hungarian national team, which I know we'll also get into. But those are good players who might be able to settle in a bit easier if they stay on the international ice, which they will be able to do at Canlan.
Absolutely. And yeah, I was going to bring up Emma Woods and Brooke Boquist, both of whom played in the SDHL with Lexington's IF. So why don't we get right into players for that reasoning? So I'm just going to pull up the roster really quickly. And so we may as well have some fun with this and get right into it. So maybe we'll start with Brooke Boquist. Again, Boquist played last season Lexington's IF in Sweden in the 2018-19 season of Modo Hockey and in 41 SDHL games over 2 seasons. The 5'4" center had 25 goals and 24 assists for 49 points. She also led Lexington's IF in goals last season with 14. So you see a player of this capability, but then again, a lot of these players on the roster, and they still have more to add being at 17. How does this, provide us such an, offensively packed team?
I mean, Brooke Bookfist is a skilled player in her own right. I know the SDHL might not be the most skilled league in the world, but you know what? Nor is the NWHL. Some of the best players aren't playing in the league. So you're on the international ice, Brooke Bookfist, and so she's used to that. She won't have that adjustment. She's already scored at quite a good rate, 29 points last year, over a point per game throughout the SDHL, which don't really know how that translates. I know in men's hockey we have a lot of tools that can translate league to league. It's not really something that's been developed for the women's game yet. Hopefully we can get there in the future. But I think a player like Brooke Boakfast can come into the NWHL, be an impact player, be on that starting lineup. But I don't really know if she's going to be able to take that jump and maybe make a national team at some point with their accolades in the NWHL.
Right, and that's always a concern in terms of how game translates. So again, that's something that's going to have to be a way to be seen. However, I'm also going to touch on some of the girls who played in North America but haven't played pro for at least a year. And this is something that we touched on in discussion last night, talking about today's show. And so in that, right, we see Kristen Barbara, Taylor Woods, Emma Greco, Jenna McParland, a lot of whom played last season with the PWHPA. And so while they're playing with other pro players, not everyone would consider that to have been a pro season. So how does a year off essentially for those players kind of, I don't know, drive them towards maybe a laggy start to open the Toronto 6 and inaugural season?
Well, with Emma Greco, she didn't get a professional season last year while she was playing with professional players and making a small bit of money on the side with the secret showcase tour. She wasn't getting a whole bunch, and it wasn't really that team professional experience as she would have had in the past with the CWHL when she was with the Toronto Furies, or that she's going to get with the Toronto Six. But one thing that I do think is going to play into her advantage this year is the fact that she's been a hockey player in Toronto. We all know with the Toronto Maple Leafs, the media attention and media scrutiny that is put on those players. And it's not going to be the same on the Toronto Six. That's just the nature of where the Toronto Six land in the Toronto sporting landscape. But having that experience playing in Toronto, playing in sort of the epitome of hockey across the world, being right here in Ontario, that Emma Greco is going to have a good opportunity with that because she already knows sort of what to expect as a women's hockey player in Toronto. And you compare that to some of the other players on the roster, like I know you mentioned Jenna McParland. She played with the Markham Thunder. She knows how to win, but she hasn't put that winning to the test in the last year. So, I mean, it's over a year now with the COVID-19 taking over the world and shortening all these seasons. And so you start in January. She hasn't played a competitive game in 15 months. So it's going to be tough to get that competitive edge back. But I'm pretty confident that with somebody like Jenna McParland, who has won countless things, including a Clarkson Cup with the Markham Thunder, she's going to be able to get into that after a couple games. And we'll see some great effort from the Toronto Six, led by some people who played in the CWHL.
Right. And, while you've touched on McParland, again, I mentioned her teammates from Markham, Taylor and Kristen. And so I might even pull out your U Sports knowledge here and the fact that Kristen played with the York Lions, played 2 years with the Markham Thunder following her collegiate career. And after taking a year off on hiatus with the PWHPA, returns to pro with the Toronto Six. So what are your expectations for her as someone who developed through the Canadian way rather than the American collegiate way?
Well, I think it's the perfect situation. She's returning to a rink that she knew so well for 5 years, playing with the York Lions. She might even have a couple teammates that she had if those guys end up on the roster with Aaron Locke and possibly even Jenna Gray, another free agent. Aaron Locke, of course, being that high draft pick from the NWHL entry draft a couple months ago. But Kristen Barbara, you're bringing in a quality player. She has experience in the CWHL, so she knows that pro experience. With the PWHPA, she's familiar with the people who are coming from that organization, and most familiar most important is that she's familiar with the surroundings that she's going to be playing in Canlan. And so while she won't be in the little cramped York Lions locker room, she'll be in the slightly more spacious Toronto Six locker room. So I think Kristen Barber is a very good add to the Toronto Six team, but it'll be interesting to see, again, as a lot of these players, how she transitions from a lot of time off of competitive hockey.
Right, and being somewhat of a homecoming for Kristen Barbara, I think is going to be very special for her, and getting to do it potentially with some of the former York Lions from the last couple of years or whatever it may be. I think might also add something special to it. Again, we are still awaiting word on what the rest of this roster looks like over the next several weeks, maybe month. There's no way to know, but you mentioned Jenna Gray, who is a defender and transitioned, if I read that correctly, to an assistant coach, kind of putting her playing career on hiatus. So, first, maybe let's start there. Do you think it would be hard in that case if Toronto did peg that player exactly to transition back to a player? And, I would ask you about how special that is for her to return on home ice, being somewhere that she already is as a coach. But let's kind of tackle the player aspect first.
Well, I think you look at Jenna Gray as a player, you go back to her time with the York Lions, and she was good. She didn't dominate offensively, but she's going to add a veteran presence to the back end. She was a solid defender during her U Sports days. And 12 points through 30 games or so, that's not too bad, but it's nothing to really get too excited about. And who knows how that translates to professional game, which is quite a step up. But you look at her experience both in U Sports with Kristen Barber as well as part of the York Lions with Aaron Locke, if Aaron Locke finds her way onto the roster as well. And so you have a lot of things that you do like about Jenna Gray. And while in a regular year, I would probably say that she would not be in the conversation because she would be so dedicated to coaching the York Lions. This year, who knows? Because the York Lions aren't playing any hockey, and Jenna Gray is still here in Toronto. So maybe she does return to Canlan in some form, or at least to something related to Canlan in some form with the Toronto Six. But as we know, the NWHL is often just signing players to one-year deals, and I think that would be a perfect thing for Jenna Gray to sort of fill in this year before getting back to her job with the York Lions.
Absolutely. And while we are on this subject of U Sports to some degree, the first U Sports player to sign in the NWHL this year was McDougall, whose first name I actually can't remember at this time, from the University of Alberta. I don't know if you did any looking into her as she signed with Buffalo, but do you think that this trend of U Sports player, it's Autumn McDougall, do you think that this sudden spurt of U Sports players signing is a sign of good things to come in terms of professional recognition for the ability to be able to play pro?
Well, I think the professional recognition has already been there in U Sports for a long time. We take a look at a player like Melody Daou, who we spoke to a while ago. She made the Canadian national team. She won a gold medal in Sochi playing for the McGill Martlets. So there's already success in U Sports and success that's been found on the international stage. So it's just transitioning that into the pro game, which we all know in North America is a little heated at the moment between the PWHPA and the NWHL. And so it really depends where you're going. We've seen, I think it's about 10 players from U Sports commit to the PWHPA. And of course, we've seen Autumn McDougall and Aaron Locke selected in the NWHL draft as well. And so I think the recognition's already there. It's just back to that original goal in North American women's hockey, which is having one professional league to play in.
Right. So let's touch on Aaron Locke. Aaron Locke was drafted by the Toronto Six. She was the first pick in Toronto Six team history, and she has not yet been signed. And I believe you got to cover her at points of last season, being her last of university hockey. So can you talk a little bit about perhaps what you liked in her to open this conversation?
Yeah, well, Aaron Locke's a skilled player. She very good on the forward front. She wasn't a first line player by any means, but she played a very crucial role in getting the York Lions all the way to the McCaw Cup final against Toronto, where they did lose. But if it wasn't for a bit of officiating and a certainly ruckus crowd at Varsity Arena back in March, just days before the shutdown, actually, Aaron Locke would have had a OUA gold medal around her neck. But they went to the U Sports National Championship, and if they had gotten to play, I think they would have had a real chance at making a run for it. Because of course Toronto lost to Mount Royal in the opening round as well, and they would have had that camel off their back So it is an issue that COVID sort of canceled that, and she didn't really get to finish off her career. And of course, it's an issue that she hasn't signed yet. But who really knows at this point? I mean, the NWHL, everything's really up in the air. We don't even know if the Toronto Six will play, let alone play in Canada, if they do hit the ice indeed at some point. So, I mean, I think Erin Locke wants to play, but she's going to hold out until the situation is a bit more clear.
Right, and that was part of the reason that the Toronto Six continued to only be at 17 players, as I was told. That's exactly it. They wanted clarity before signing any further. So, again, that could come this week. That could come in the next couple of weeks. I've heard different things, but we're gonna have to kind of wait and see what happens for the and so let me ask you this. I mentioned Jenna Gray, who was an assistant coach with the York Lions after taking some time off of playing. And so let's just say Erin Locke and Jenna Gray both signed with the Toronto Six. How would that perhaps favor Erin Locke with her coach all of a sudden on her pro team?
Well, you'd basically be calling it the Toronto Lions at that point, because you're playing out at the York Lions arena. They were there first. You have probably the York Lions logo at center ice, especially if it was a regular U Sports year. And so you'd have three players who have suited up for the Lions on the Toronto Six. So that certainly would be cool and a nice tip of the hat to Canadian University hockey. But I mean, for both Erin Locke and Kristen Barbara, having somebody involved with the York program is going to be good. I know that York program quite well, and people are quite familiar with their coaches. And it's almost like with the coaches, I guess backtrack a little. Jenna Gray, 24 years old. Erin Locke, 22 years old. So they're really not that far off. Sure, Jenna Gray was in a bit of a senior position than Erin Locke was, of course, being a coach over a player. But I think that the relationship between coach and player, especially at the U Sports level with ages so close, is a lot closer than it would be at a national level or in the National Hockey League or something like that, where you could have somebody 30 years apart, a whole lifetime apart. So I really don't think it's going to be an issue. At most, it'll be something nice.
Right, and I think again, at most, it might even be an advantage. So I wanted to get your take. I was thinking, that would be really interesting, and I'm sure that that thought would certainly be relayed, especially by those players who would kind of be like, "You're coaching your teammate now? Cool." So that being said, let's go back to the international stage, to something that you're also familiar with, which is more so the head coach of the Hungarian team in relation to Sarah Steele, who you mentioned earlier, is someone who is eligible to be in the Women's World Championship this year, which is right now from the IIHF, as of today, one of the only looming tournaments with still the smidge of possibility of being played this year. So that being said, she would be playing under Lisa Haley, head coach of the Ryerson Rams. So you look at her numbers and consider that eligibility. What goes through your mind?
Well, you take a look at Lisa Haley, and she's been very successful both with the Ryerson Rams and before the St. Mary's Huskies. Of course, her colleague at the St. Mary's Huskies, Trevor Steenberg, just retired. He's now with the Seattle Kraken in the NHL as part of their scouting department. So you see two people who were at St. Mary's at the same time. They moved on to great things just in the last few months with the Seattle Kraken and Lisa Haley with the Hungarian Hockey Federation. You take a look at this tournament, and it's back in the Maritimes, and so Lisa Haley is only going to be a couple hours from her home. Sarah Steele is going to be around Lisa Haley all year, I'm sure. If they do get to play in Toronto, Lisa Haley will be watching Sarah Steele very closely, and because there's still a very good pool of players back in Hungary that she can choose from. Sarah Steele is by no means a lock on this team, but she might be playing with under somebody who is just minutes away at another university hockey rink in Toronto. And Lisa Haley, a great pick for the Hungarian national team to have as their head coach. She's tough, but she gets the best out of her team, and I think you can see that with not only the growth of the Ryerson program but also their finish last year just short of the McCaw Cup final.
Right. So something else I want to touch on is, and I think you nailed it there. First off, Sarah Steele would become the second player on the Toronto Six to play in the Women's World Championship, as Cheyenne Darkangelo has seen time with USA Hockey previously. But something that I think stands out to me is that a couple players on this team have played with the Canada U18 team, which is still an international tournament by all means with Hockey Canada, and Lindsay Eastwood is one of them. So for the Toronto Six, does it perhaps benefit them that some of these players come in with that experience as well under their belt, prior to their pro career launching?
Well, I think having any experience in any sort is an advantage. The more you get to play, the more you learn, the more you make mistakes, the more you can learn from those mistakes. So playing a couple extra games at the under 18 World Junior Championships is definitely an advantage. I don't know how much of an advantage that sort of experience is, but it's definitely something.
Right. And then Gary Soper, the assistant coach now alongside Digit Murphy. I should make note that he's been a scout with Hockey Canada, helping to build national team programs. So let's look at the build of this Toronto Six team from an offensive and defensive standpoint. And he's also worked in the PWHL with the Etobicoke Junior Dolphins, I believe. Actually, no, correct me. I'm correct in that one.
Whitby Junior Wolves.
Yes, the Whitby Wolves. So, you kind of consider that experience, and this is surely a different level for him. But do you think that can still pay off in another way, seeing as he has helped to build a pro team in the national women's team?
Well, if you take a look at his work with the Whitby Junior Wolves in the PWHL, he's been able to move players on from a lower level in the PWHL onto a higher level in the NCAA or in Canadian University Hockey and U Sports. And so he already has shown that he can take players at one level and move them up to another level. So if he can do that same thing with the Toronto Six, you move an expansion team to a championship team. You move single players into national team players. And so he's shown that he can help grow players' skill sets, personalities, and really everything there is behind a hockey player. And if Gary Soper can apply those same sort of lessons and skills that he learned as a part of the Whitby Junior Wolves in the PWHPL, he can definitely have a chance to move some of these players, maybe even into the national team picture. Of course, the NWHL will have to garner the eye of Hockey Canada, because right now there's even some preference on where they're scouting their players from.
Right. And, there is no lack of experience on this Toronto Six team from a coaching or player standpoint. We know that Digit Murphy spent 18 years with Brown University in the NCAA, and then spent a couple of years with the Shenzhen Kara, St. Rays, and Kunlun Red Stars China hockey programs before transitioning to the CWHL, where she was also with the Boston Blades. And she continues to be around, and that's one heck of a resume. So you look at the fact that she's now literally built up from the ground the Toronto Six organization, and what she's done to this point, and she's brought in all Canadians, and I mean, this is a stacked roster. So I guess, what's your stance on that end when you see a coach like that? And again, because we talked about Lisa Haley and what her resume is looking like. So how do you consider Digit Murphy in her success and what she's been able to accomplish through this?
Well, I think you look at Digit Murphy when she brought in the expansion team. While they hadn't named a coach at that time, I know when I saw it, I was like, okay, Digit Murphy's the perfect coach, right? She had all that experience that you just went over. It made sense that she was going to find herself behind a professional bench one day, and it's just so suitable that it's for the Toronto Six. So Digit Murphy, very strong coach, and she's going to be able to guide this team through if they do get to play, and if they do get to play in Toronto or even not Toronto, it will be a tough season. I know a lot of teams got used to playing south of the border in the summer leagues, and so it's going to be a tough year. And who really knows who the Toronto Six will have on their roster, let alone coaching staff, come opening day with all the fluidity of the situation regarding COVID-19. But Digit Murphy, a strong coach, a demanding coach, but at the same time, a fun coach, and she's built this roster from the ground up. And I think having an invested interest in it, she'll also be able to find success.
Right, and this is now the second privately owned team in the NWHL alongside the Boston Pride. And with that, they've also been able to garner some private sponsors just for, individuality purposes for the team. And one of those is Her Story, which is something that is co-founded by Digit Murphy, let alone the fact that there are now some Canadian sponsors within the league itself, such as Blade Tech Hockey, Stark Hockey. So, you look at these, sponsors and partners to provide equipment and resources to the players, and we consider the NWHL's growth over the last year with Twitch and whatnot. So you take that into consideration, and what do you think that means to this hockey club, and how does that make a difference in their goal before they even hit the ice for the first pro season?
Well, any sponsorship, any financial backing is definitely an advantage to have for the Toronto Six, and they're going to need that this season, especially with possible COVID-19 precautions that they're going to have to take. So any financial backing that you can get behind the Toronto Six, and in a bit bigger picture, any financial backing that you can get behind women's hockey is very important to the growth of the game.
Right, and that's exactly what they're after. Ben, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So that does it for this episode of 6 and 6 on the Barn Burner TV network and ZingoTV channel 250. Make sure to stick around next week. Maybe we'll have a player. Maybe we'll have some more news on the front of where things end up for the Toronto Six. Ben, where can viewers find you on social media?
Feel free to follow me at bensteiner00 on Twitter.
All right, so that is where you can find it for everything U Sports related. And you keep doing the good work you do, and obviously we'll continue talking because there's never enough to not talk about. So again, that does it for this episode of Six and Sticks. Make sure you are following me on Twitter at Justin Levine HBS, the NWHL at NWHL, the Toronto Six at the Toronto Six, and Barn Burner TV Network on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram at BarnBurnerNet. So I'll be back next week. Justin Levine and Ben Steiner signing off.